Contentment is a prized possession. It enables you to rise above difficult circumstances, to maintain your joy and your peace and your sense of well being when others will become upset and frustrated and disappointed, angry and bitter. One of the characteristics of those who lack contentment is that they tend to complain about things, whether it's big things or little things. It becomes a habit of the way they interact with others and the way they view life as they complain. Of course, if you make this a regular habit, it makes it difficult for you to maintain good relationships because nobody wants to be around someone who complains all the time unless they also are a complainer, in which case they're probably not going to listen to your complaints. They just want to share their own complaints. Let me explain how or show how a complaining personality can warp your sense of who you are and what you can accomplish and even your future. In Exodus chapter 15, the Israelites have just been set free. They've left Egypt and all the slavery that entailed. And then when the Egyptian army, led by Pharaoh, came to recapture them and bring them back to slavery, the Lord miraculously intervened, parted the Red Sea, enabled them to go across the Red Sea on dry ground to safety. The Egyptians, when they tried to cross the Red Sea themselves, the Lord brought the water back upon them and they drowned. So now the Israelites were so happy. They were thrilled to death with what God was doing in their lives. They were dancing, they were praising God, they were singing songs of worship. Oh, they were thrilled to death. But then in that same chapter, they came upon water that tasted bitter. And they complained about it rather than going to God and saying, God, can you bring us some water that, or show us water that tastes better? But they didn't. They just complained about it. In the next chapter, they were griping about the lack of meat they had to eat. Now, this is despite the fact that God was providing them the miraculous manna from heaven, which probably was more nutritious and better for you than anything they could have ever uncovered or discovered themselves. Even in a great and a prosperous land, this food was better than anything they could find. And yet, they complained about it. The next chapter, they're fussing and griping because there doesn't seem to be any water. And rather, again, than going to God and praying and asking the Lord to bring them water to drink, they griped about it. And they were arguing, contending that God was just had sent them into the desert to die of thirst, which of course was ludicrous. They were God's chosen people. They had the promised land before them. Lord wasn't going to allow them to die of thirst in the desert. But they didn't believe that God would take care of them. And rather than trusting him and being content with their circumstances, they complained. This attitude that they possessed so dramatically warped their personalities collectively that when it came time for them to enter into the promised land, they couldn't do it. They complained that the people that lived in the land were too strong and they could never drive them out. And probably the land wasn't even that good anyway. You see, when you develop a habit of complaining, rather than trusting God and believing that he will take care of you and assuming that things are good and worthwhile, when you develop that habit of complaining, it shapes your future. Because now the people who had this way of thinking didn't go into the promised land. And in fact, they had to die in the wilderness over the course of 40 years And it was the next generation that was allowed to go into the promised land. They weren't ready for the blessings that God had for them because of their lack of contentment. In the next video, I'm going to share with you some strategies for building a contented life. I'll see you then.